We're live.
All right, folks, after a brief pause, we are back to get back into the conversation in and around H 244. And that is our bill about media marketing dollars. Where are we? It is an act related to the state contract and standards for advertising. I see a hand up from
Thank you. Someone's phone is dinging, if they don't mind turning it
Ding Awareness.
on.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yep. All right, so we have more testimony coming in. I guess if we could start with Wanda Manoli, please, the commissioner from Department of Building and Grounds. Wanda, how are you? BGS.
I'm wonderful.
Sorry,
Chair.
General Services. I still buildings.
It's okay. I think I was there when it was the other name as well, to be absolutely honest with you. So it doesn't. So, Chair and honorable members of the committee, thank you. I'm Wanda Manoli, Commissioner of Buildings and General Services. I really appreciate you finding time to have Buildings and General Services come in and just give some comments on the bill. I also have Deb Demore, who is my Director of Purchasing and Contracting here. And I would, I just want to do a quick introduction, and I would, with your permission, like to turn it over for her to give you, I think, a little bit more specifics on the functionality, if that's acceptable, Chair.
That sounds wonderful to me. Thank you, Commissioner.
Oh, okay. So I just recently learned of this bill. And I want to just say to you that we really have not had a lot of time to delve into it and really sort of analyze it and understand maybe some of the data that you have yourself received or information on this. And so my comments are going to be general. In general, I want to say that I think there's a bigger impact in what is being proposed on agencies throughout the state. And I know you've heard from some departments, but not from all of them. And again, I'm just asking that if you have the opportunity to seek their testimony or get their comments in writing, I think it would be really beneficial to the work that you are trying to accomplish. I know you have heard from DHR. I know that Commissioner Gresham has provided you some financial data. There's the Agency of Commerce and Community Development that I think would really have some good comments to offer. I think the Agency of Human Services. And why I'm talking about this is that because I believe this bill impacts the operation and the functionality of many state agencies, and that all of that should be considered. We know this bill is focusing on TV, radio, digital advertisement. And we do understand the importance of local media. So I'm not sitting here to say, we shouldn't work locally in any way, and your goal. But there's our immediate reaction in general to the bill is what I am really concerned about in the way it's proposed, especially in some of the criteria, is that it could actually limit, not enhance. And that's my concern. And when I look at the form and the requirements that all of the bids would have to do and the 80% piece, that when we start getting into that form and these companies having to validate that they meet these criteria, we could be in a position where they don't validate and now we don't have any bids, where I think we have a little bit more leeway and opportunity at the agency level and at the department level. And I think that's my overall, concern. I don't think it's the intent of this committee in any way to be restricting. I think it's the intent that we want to make sure we have, that everyone has an opportunity. I think when I look at the language, part of what is concerning is that, again, I'm concerned about this 80%. And Deb's going to give you some general data on what our Vermont we already have a requirement that we give preference to Vermont businesses. And I think that the statistics are going to show it's not at 80% or at 70%. I've heard that you may be identifying or looking at maybe carving out some areas because of maybe some testimony. I've heard, I'm not sure. And I understand why, but I think if we have to, if we look at treating others differently for the right reasons, that 80% is going to even have a bigger impact on a smaller majority when you start looking at the data. And again, I understand it's crossover. I understand that you want to advance bills, but I also believe in our process and that, working on a bill to get what we really want to accomplish that has a positive impact on the operations of state government and accomplishing your goals is something I believe we all have in common. So with that, Chair, I would like to turn it over to Deb to just give you some highlights on the content.
Sure. And so it is 70% that in a discussion yesterday, we did drop the threshold down for amendment. So it went down to that. There were a couple of other changes to the bill, which is posted on our page.
Okay.
So, but my other question for you is, I know the Senate has been doing some work on the same conversation in Senate GovOps. Have you spoken with those folks?
We are actually, I feel like we're on the flash run right now, everyone. I got my red cape on.
All right.
We are going into the Senate after we leave here to talk about it as well. My goal is never to try to create controversy between the two bodies in a bill unless we absolutely have to. They are bills that are sister bills. I mean, they say the same thing. So our testimony is going to reflect the same. But again, I think hearing from others, brings in the balanced conversation. And thank you for allowing BGS. This is our responsibility. Contracting for state government sits under Buildings and General Services. So we're looking at this as providing services to our customers, but also what does it mean to the operation and how do we manage this? So with that, Deb, please take the seat.
I just have a couple things to add to what Commissioner Manoli has already shared. So I certainly appreciate the opportunity. I'm Debbie Demore, Director of Purchasing and Contracting for the Department of Buildings and General Services. Something that Wanda said that relates to, how we award to vendors. We really award in the best interest of the state. There is a statute with respect to commodities that gives us guidance on how we would award or consider a bid. Under services, there is no specific a statute that dictates how we award a contract. So whatever we put in a request for proposal for evaluation criteria would dictate how we are going to review proposals received and how we're going to award. We have the authority under Administrative Bulletin 3.5 that all things being equal, we're going to consider a Vermont firm over a non-Vermont firm. But in general, there is no specific in-state preference. So I just wanted to share that. As far as this bill, it certainly represents a significant change, in my opinion, to the process for contracting. The 80% threshold and now 70% threshold that is now reflected. If we look at the contracts that BGS currently holds, or the Department of Buildings and General Services currently holds, we hold just around 1,400 contracts that are, some are department specific, some are statewide. We have many statewide contracts of those. And even though we don't have a preference for Vermont firms, we issue, I think of those 45% are issued to Vermont firms. We work very hard with the Vermont vendor community. So where we can issue to local communities, we do. So I did want to share that number. So when we look at 70% or even 80, it just seems like a very high threshold to meet. And to go to what Commissioner Manoli says, I think it would be, it's a huge threshold for us to meet. I think it would be problematic. But currently, advertising contracting is mostly done through agencies. Specific, yes.
I'm sorry, Rep. Nugent, like, was that a?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could like talk a little bit more about why it seems hard. Why that would be hard, just to elaborate on that a little bit.
Specifically about 70 maybe?
Yeah.
70%. We work really hard to work with Vermont firms now, and of the number of contracts that we issue, you know, it probably ranges anywhere between the 45% to maybe 55%, depending on, you know, the contracts that we issued. And we've been working at that and trying to educate for a long time. So it's really going to look at the need and where the fit is. So to go from us working on 1,400 contracts, for probably the best we can currently do is 55%. That threshold of even 70 just seems like a real challenge. The basis and the pool of vendors is much smaller. There's just a variety of things that I think would be problematic in that respect. I mean, I can look at some other information to provide you, but that's what I can share right now on that. So services in general are decentralized at an agency level unless we're putting something out statewide, then BGS or the Department of Buildings and General Services would handle that. So the criteria that in need, we don't have visibility of currently. So this would be a significant change for BGS to take over this responsibility because we don't currently have that. So as Commissioner Manoli indicated that, you know, you may want to bring in other, you know, agencies or departments to testify. They would have the specific data on what they do or don't do right now as far as numbers and contracts that they hold for advertising. With respect to buildings and general services, we, in the last fiscal year, $7,500 were spent on specific advertising media, and 75% of that went to local community.
Representative Waters.
So when you were saying earlier, thank you for coming, by the way, I know it's last minute, I appreciate it. When you said 45% is what you're getting now for your percentage that you spend on Vermont businesses, is that what you're saying?
Contracts that are issued to Vermont.
Contracts, okay, but that's not just advertising, it's all contracts.
It's all contracts.
Okay, and then you just said that you currently spend 75% of your ad budget on Vermont outlets?
I don't know what BGS's advertising budget is. I know that there's two divisions within BGS that have utilized advertising funds. And specifically of those funds, 7,500 were spent to local media.
So you spent 7,500, but you're not sure what the total budget is. You're not sure what that percentage, that 7,500 is?
No, I think
Okay.
on the one, getting in, let's see. So one of them was for myself for a project, and the contract was issued for 25,000. 5,000 of that is targeted for media, which is local. And the other is a curator's office. I think they looked at, I think it was just over 3,500, and 25 of that 3,500 was for local media. That's how we came up with the 7,500. But those are the only advertising requirements that BGS, to my knowledge, currently has.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
Thank you. From a solicitation and contracting perspective, it would require additional requirements be inserted into the RFP or request for a proposal process. We do have concerns from the vendor community that have been expressed that they already feel our permanent contracting process is cumbersome. So adding another layer that could be problematic, we do have concerns over that as well. So that is something else we would want to point out. Vendor community wants a simplified process. We also want a simplified process. And there's always concern that if we're adding another requirement, and in this case, we feel it would be a certification form that would have to be inserted into the process. If that's not returned, if it's not signed, if they can't meet the requirements, then the state would not consider the bid. So we feel that that would, also be problematic.
What's
And Chair, I just want to reiterate what Director Demore is saying. The way the bill is proposed right now, and I call it the Section B, you have all of this criteria. And so when we look at your bill and we look at that section, the way we are trying to apply, oh my goodness, if you pass this, what does it mean to it? This is where Deb is saying we'd have to have them do a certification form. And because of how you've written that into the statute, that is an automatic. If they don't respond, if they don't complete it, if we can't evaluate it, it would actually, this is where I was saying you could have an adverse effect, that it would be not a bid considered. And I'm not sure that's your intent. I just want to build
Absolutely.
on that point.
Oh, thank you. I heard.
Okay, thank you.
So with this, and again, this would be new for BGS to take on as a responsibility that we don't currently have. And with the amount of time that we had to review this and look at what impacts, and I think we need a little bit more time to sufficiently understand those impacts. But our first look at it gave us some pause and some concern as far as thresholds that we would have to meet, additional documentation through the RFP process that the vendor community and the state would have to be responsible for. They'd have to, meet that. We'd have to understand that they could meet that. But so there is some additional review that I think we would like to do. And again, I think that the biggest message I could share is that we do feel that this is going to be impactful to all agencies and departments of the state. And as Commissioner Manoli indicated, would probably warrant, testimony from other or feedback from other agencies or departments. Thank you.
Any questions? Yes.
Thank you. What is the certification form?
The sections B through F on part of the bill, that the standards that they would have to meet, we feel that that would have to be a specific, what we refer to as a certification form, be put into the RFP process or request for proposal process. So when a vendor responds, they're going to check that off, that they meet that requirement, attest to it, so that we can review that and go forward. We want to make sure that they're qualified based on what's in the bill.
So in this instance, it would be, are you a local media outlet or is this a local media outlet?
Yes, and then can you check off that you meet the standard of a local media outlet?
Any
Thank
other questions? No.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Yeah. Now, the amended language. Yesterday, is this? Yes. If you'd like to join us up at the table, please, sir.
Everyone. Jonathan Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. We'll screen share with you. There we go. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, sir.
So you'll see that I switched to a strike all to accommodate the request to drop down those percentages. So there's, while this looks relatively large, the sole changes I'm just going to point to. So the first of these on page 2, we're talking about section 2, the actual threshold, what percentage of total annual value of those advertising services have to go in-state. Those have been dropped down to 70%, as you can see on line 13 and on line 18. The more substantive piece to think about is the exemptions at the bottom of that page. So we're talking about subsection C on line 20. The Commissioner of BGS may exclude from the total annual value of advertising services any advertisement focused on tourism and any employment search or job posting. So adding that employment search piece and job posting piece. So those are the 2 tweaks to the initial draft as introduced. Happy to take questions on any of that or the bill more broadly.
Any questions from the table? It looks like the commissioner might have something to say. Yes.
Just, again, I apologize for not being here and being able to discuss this, sooner, but what if we don't meet a threshold of 70%? Because when I, and I'm just so when I read, because you're saying we will contract with 70%. What occurs what occurs if we don't get a 70% response? Do you?
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
And that just came up, so I apologize for speaking so freely from the sidelines, but when I just listened to that, depending on what we put out for bid, because if this were to pass and we were doing it for every entity, how do all of a sudden I'm processing, how do I meet that 70%? And what happens if I don't get the 70%?
Can I answer from the sidelines?
Certainly, Mr. Hines.
My perspective, Paul Heitz, freelance journalist, advocating for this bill. I mean, I think a lot of news outlets in the state are not aware of the fact that they can be considered for this sort of thing. And I think that this would certainly be more work for your department. And I know that's a big deal. I don't say that lightly, but I think that if BGS were to go out to the very important and valued local media organizations around the state and say, hey, we want to be making use of you to help spread the word to Vermonters. If they took a proactive approach, I am sure, I know that every news outlet in the state would love to be playing a role in advertising. So I think it is quite doable. I just think that at the moment, people probably aren't aware that's a possibility. So totally recognize this is asking your department to do something quite different, but I think there's a way to get there. Really do. I think that's the point. This is asking the state to do something differently. It's saying, and it might be something that will be harder, but it is saying we think it is important to take these additional steps to keep this money local, and we're going to do that work to try to get there.
Okay. Representative Hango.
Commissioner, I just want to ask you if you meant that, which was just answered, or what I thought you meant, which was what happens if my departments and my agencies do not meet the 70% threshold? Am I punished? Are we punished?
Well,
What kind of,
thank you. So that was in listening to your legislative counsel sort of quickly summarize. That is where I went, because I'm hearing it as I shall meet the 70%. And there's never a guarantee when we bid out that, we're gonna get 2 responses, let alone 10 responses. Putting a bid together for the members of this committee, no matter what, if it's a commodity, if it's a construction contract, the investment in time to respond to an RFP is very detailed. And that goes to the director's point of businesses are asking us to be more business friendly. So, but you still, in order for us to do fair evaluations, we have to be very detailed on certain things. So is it 70% of every time I go out to bid, or is it 70% in general? And that's just immediately, again, I appreciate you allowing me to speak from the sidelines.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I'm reacting. I can't lead and give direction if that's not clear. If your intent is that in a fiscal year, I'm just making this up, that, that 70% of the Vermont businesses are reached out to bid, that's a different measure than getting 70% in the other way.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
This is not for Ledge Council, I'm sorry, but while we're doing this. So, I have 2 questions. The first is, are there, what,
Would you like to come on?
do you want to come back, Charlotte?
Yeah, let's
Sure.
just do this. Yeah, thank you, council.
Thank
It's
you.
just here for a late visit.
I know.
We haven't had you in yet. Welcome to the
I
next.
know.
Thank you to you and your department.
Thank
This is beautiful. Agatha gave me a tour before with the final touches, and I'm in awe.
Very lucky and appreciative.
Yes, and you got the good straw with this committee.
How many? So my first question is, are there other, can you think of any other conditions that are put upon you when you're creating these RFPs?
Well, there's statute, so there's
Yeah.
multiple, there's expectations and good bidding practices. We have to have a fair, open process. There are, some of the items that Deb referenced, but it depends if it's a construction contract or if it's a supplies contract. So there are, and our responsibility, and this is government operations, is to ensure that we have a fair, open process and that everyone's evaluated the same and every bid is looked at and every bid is rated. And we work in partnership with the agencies and departments. We don't do this in isolation. So they determine what their expectations are, their specs. We help them write clear. We try to help them, in the cases of making sure that the RFP that goes out is very clear so everyone can understand it. So it depends, but the answer in general, yes, right?
Okay, and that would lead me to my next question, which would be what happens if you don't meet like certain conditions now? I mean, to answer your question, I should say first, there's no punishment put into the bill. There's no.
Well, I think two things happen.
Okay.
So first of all, in some of our process, there's an opportunity for bidders to ask us questions. So for the bidders, there's always an opportunity to come back within a window of time and we communicate with everyone where there needs to be clarity on the RFP. And, so that happens. If we get bids and then we go after that, if you're not responsive based on the criteria of rating, then your bid will not be considered. And if we don't get bids, then sometimes we have to go back out and we have to evaluate that. And I think I'm answering your question. So every scenario is different, but we would potentially be, in this position of, we may get 5 responses and only 1 meets all of the criteria. I'm just using this as an example. That would be the responsive bidder, and it could be an out-of-state firm. So that's where I start to get into this measurement. I don't think that's because the way, again, I'm reading it, how do I bring in this 70% to say this is how I have to make a decision on a bid when we have a clear best practice and expectations of other places in the statute? And if I can just ask the director if you would add anything to that long-winded comment
No, I
statement.
think it's summarized it, very well. The only thing I would add in, if the Jason's deputy commissioner just mentioned, could there be a protest? There's always potential for protest.
There's that too.
So there is that. And then, the other thought is, say we get to, we're 8 months into a year. And where we contracted with, local news media. That mean we can't consider, other bids, from non-local media for the rest of the year in order to meet that 70%. I mean, again, we just received this. We haven't fully vetted it, but there are a lot of questions that we have. And fully support.
I believe Rep. Nugent had a question.
I was just wondering if you were aware of the local food purchase assistance cooperative agreement program, which I was just curious in doing some digging yesterday. Where the USDA works with state agencies to make sure that the bulk of the food that they purchase is from local farmers to for the same kind of reasons, like to shore up the local food systems and support farmers. And if you'd be interested in working with, the Agency of Ag to find out more about how that works.
So I'm not familiar with the details. I am familiar with that, but I want to say to this legislative body, I think that's the intent in the language where you've asked us to consider Vermont businesses while it's not specific to a service or commodity that we do that in general. So, I'm always open to looking at other things and opportunities. Again, we're looking at this bill, I think, in what you're passing, and I'm trying to apply that as it is, which would be not saying, because I think your language is very specific in what we have to do. That's how we're reading it.
Representative Pismo?
Does this bill have to go to Commerce?
No, this bill would definitely go to approps. It's directing spending.
Question whether the interstate commerce and advertising. So it would go to Commerce.
My understanding after it leaves us, it would go to appropriations. So, and then obviously the Senate would continue. But yeah, so this is one of those weird conversations that cross over, not an adjournment. Yeah.
And I do understand that committee. I feel that, part of my organization and leadership is to try to understand and work towards things. And I'm really put in a position of reacting right now because of the short time.
Yeah,
So
I'm very respectful.
thank you.
To that position.
Thank you.
Representative
Hoover.
I just were curious.
Randolph and then Stone and Burlington.
No, Hoover.
Like you're hearing again.
Okay, Hoover, Randolph.
Protest refers to instances where there might be an appeal to a rejected bid.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. If somebody, if the vendor, the contractor doesn't feel that they were considered appropriately, for whatever reason, then they can submit.
How often does that happen?
I can't speak for.
That's fine, yeah, no,
I
absolutely.
can only speak for BG.
Sure.
But we take our role very seriously within, government as part of contracting and procurement. We don't have that many, I'd say maybe a handful or so a year. I think if we get one, they kind of go in threes and,
Do they tend to overturn the decision, or is it usually?
we do a thorough review of the file to want to make sure that it's got and there's very few that are.
And I just, and that gives me great confidence in the work they do, but that's why the processes and how we're evaluating them and the documentation are so critical.
Representative.
On as court chair, but why would it go to approps if there's not new money?
Well, it's guiding spending, isn't it?
The answer is we could send it.
I don't know, you're asking me a question.
Yes.
Asking you a question, so I
It's guiding, yes.
It's guiding spending.
But it is not appropriating any new money. If that's, maybe they won't want it. Who knows?
Yeah.
I guess if they would like to see it.
Anybody can make a case to send it.
Sure. She had another question.
Yes.
Oh, hold on, I'm looking at something real quick.
Okay.
Testimony from,
There's more questions.
but
Are you yielding to the member from Randolph?
yes.
Hamilton yielding to Randolph? How this session is going. Do you suppose we could maybe consider a pilot program to sort of figure out that threshold question?
What I would say is there a way that we could look at collecting some data or information to see where we are regarding the expectations of this bill, of the way the process is working now? Absolutely. That's looking at data and collecting that data. We have not done that. So you can look at money, but you can also look at contracts. And, I think the example that Director Demore used, saying she quickly looked at BGS's contracts and saw X. But to apply the intent or the idea of what this bill is, I believe what we understand trying to do, what does that, are we already doing it? And I understand that some, the businesses may say, no, we don't think we're getting that. I can't confirm that or deny it. So, but looking at that data is always a reasonable request. If that is what you would want.
So, Commissioner, you said before you were going to go down to the Senate. I know they're working on it down there.
Yes.
So for the sake of not being duplicative, I want to take us offline and call a 10-minute timeout so I can go speak with Senator Collmore, just so we're not having conflicting motions going on here.
Okay, I can't find where it was, but I remember in testimony, somebody was talking about asking questions about if the businesses were like women owned or minority owned or things like that. So I'm wondering what the real big, how big of a change would it be to just add one question? Like this being another question, if you're already, because that's what we heard in testimony. I know I'm not making it up.
So our standard contract has some of those elements that you're referencing in, and we give consideration. And I think that goes to, again, Debbie's comment about we look at Vermont business owned already. So I'm not sure what you would want us to look at in that sense, that it is for advertising. I think the other issue, the big change is advertising is being done at the agency level. This bill is saying all advertising contracts will now come through BGS and meet this criteria. That's a significant change.
No new money.
Are we looking for any final comments, or are you gonna do that after you do your meet with Senator Pelican?
Yeah, I want to take a break for a moment.
I just need to
And
clarify
I'm just-
something important.
Cool. I
Okay.
just clarified that it is not going to corporations.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So where does it go?
Or
Sure.
So.
all right. Was there a question for the table here?
But I was just saying, do you want final words on this now, or
No.
after you come back from break?
I come back.
Okay, perfect.
I just wanted to clarify that this is not requiring all advertising purchasing through the state to go through BGS.
That is how we are reading the bill.
That is not in any way the intention of the bill, so maybe that's some language that we will discuss. Do you have an indication of which part of the bill is giving you that impression? Because
I will find that when you take the break.